welcome the chosen ones. The moment they understand that pressure has no effect on you, the entire dynamic shifts in ways they can't control. What once worked, urgency, emotional leverage, subtle manipulation, suddenly loses all power. And in that shift, something quiet but undeniable takes place. It's not chaos on the surface, but beneath it, you can feel the instability forming. Their certainty begins to fracture, their strategies start to unravel, and that same silence returns. Only this time it's heavier. It's the sound of realization settling in, the moment they recognize that you were never reacting. You were observing, waiting, and always a step ahead. That's where everything truly shifts. Not in a moment of confrontation, not in a dramatic exchange, but in the quiet instant you chose not to engage at all. There was no need to defend, no need to explain, because something within you had already settled. And even before they could put it into words, they sensed it. The energy changed, the dynamic tilted, and what once felt predictable became uncertain. That realization didn't arrive softly. It struck with weight. It forced them to confront a truth they weren't ready for, that you had already moved beyond the point where their reactions held any influence over you. Here's what few are willing to face. When tension rises, people don't unlock brilliance. They fall back on what they've practiced the most. Pressure doesn't create clarity. It exposes conditioning. Patterns take over, emotions spike, reactions become louder and less controlled. And in that exact moment, while everyone else leans into instinct and noise, you did something different. You stepped back instead of forward, observed instead of reacted. That contrast didn't need to be announced. It was felt. Because while they became easier to read, you became harder to reach, quietly separating yourself from the very patterns that were revealing them. While others were exhausting themselves trying to force outcomes, you were studying the patterns behind them. You weren't resisting what was happening. You were understanding it. That wasn't ego. It was evolution. You didn't harden. You refined your perception. You began to see the difference between noise and signal, between motion and direction. What once felt urgent lost its grip, and what truly mattered became unmistakably clear. And in that clarity, you moved differently. Not faster, not louder, but with a precision that made every step count, while others were still trying to figure out where they stood. And without ever making a scene, without signaling a shift or seeking recognition, you became the one who moved straight to resolution, while others remained stuck justifying the struggle. There was no announcement, no visible turning point, just a quiet upgrade in how you operate. And that's what unsettles them. People know how to respond to emotion, to intensity, to noise. But calm precision, silent execution, that creates discomfort. Because while they're still processing the problem, you've already adapted, acted, and moved past it without needing the moment to validate you. No explanations, no dramatic exits, just outcomes that speak for themselves. And in a strange way, that level of quiet effectiveness feels almost disrespectful to those who expected a performance. There's a subtle irony in watching them test the same old tactics, waiting for a reaction that never comes. They scatter hints, provoke, nudge, hoping to pull you back into a familiar pattern. But nothing lands. You don't engage, you don't chase, you don't even acknowledge it. And that's the moment it truly sinks in for them, that the version of you they once knew is no longer available to access. Eventually, even they can't ignore the shift. You see it in the pauses, in the way their tone adjusts, in how interactions become more measured and less certain. It's not something you forced or staged. It's the natural result of you stepping out of patterns that no longer serve you. You're not trying to dominate the space. You've simply removed yourself from the chaos that once fed it. And that absence does more than any reaction ever could. Because in a world that thrives on overreaction and noise, the person who stays simple, direct, and unmoved becomes the one no one quite knows how to handle. This was never about shutting down your humanity. It was about outgrowing what drains it. Inefficiency in your thoughts, your emotions, your interactions stopped being something you could tolerate. And it didn't happen overnight. There was no single decision, no sudden switch. It was built through experience, through pressure that demanded adjustment, through patterns you saw too many times to ignore. Each moment shaped how you think, how you respond, how you choose. Until one day, without needing to declare it, you were operating from a place that was sharper, cleaner, and far less willing to entertain anything that no longer aligned. Now you operate with a calm authority that doesn't ask for validation. There's no hesitation, no second guessing, just a steady, grounded certainty in how you move. And that's what catches them off guard. It's not fear that takes hold, it's recognition. A quiet realization that the usual back and forth no longer applies. You don't circle issues. You don't entertain endless discussions. You resolve, you close, you move forward. And in that clarity, they understand something they hadn't prepared for, that they're no longer engaging with someone who reacts, but with someone who finishes what others only talk about. Before we step into the first point, take a moment to truly lock in your presence here. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and leave a like to align yourself with this message. If something here resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs this clarity right now. You didn't come across this by accident. There's a reason you're hearing this at this exact moment. So step into it and own it. Drop 444 in the comments so I can recognize everyone who's truly tapped in. Now, let's move into the first point. Number 1, you no longer respond from emotion because you've outgrown using it as your primary tool for solving anything. At some point, it became clear that emotional reactions weren't power. They were pauses, delays that kept you circling instead of progressing. Not because emotions lack value, but because they move at a different pace. They need time to rise, to be understood, to settle into clarity. And life doesn't slow down to accommodate that process. So you adapted. You learned to feel without being led, to understand without being pulled off course. And in doing so, you stopped letting temporary emotional states dictate permanent decisions. So quietly and without needing to declare it, you shifted roles internally. Emotions didn't disappear. They just stopped leading. You still experience everything fully, but you no longer anchor your decisions inside those moments. Instead, you observe, take what's useful, and release the rest without hesitation. That's the distinction most people miss. They think detachment means absence, when in reality, it's precision. You didn't shut down. You refined the process. And now, while others are still caught inside what they feel, you've already translated it into clarity and moved forward without carrying the weight. They mistake your calm for distance, sometimes even indifference, because they didn't witness the process that shaped it. What they're seeing now is the result, not the journey. The late nights, the internal battles, the moments where everything had to be felt and faced without an audience. That part was never visible to them. You already moved through the confusion, the frustration, the weight of it all. And by the time they're encountering your composure, you're no longer searching for answers. You've already found them. What looks like detachment is actually resolution, a quiet certainty built from everything you processed when no one else was there to see it. By the time it circles back around, you're no longer in it. You've already moved through it. What they're reacting to is something you've already resolved internally. From the outside, it looks like distance, like you've gone cold. But that's not what it is. It's completion. You've already paid the emotional cost, already asked the questions, already reached your conclusions. Before, those moments would have pulled you into endless back and forth, draining conversations, and attempts to be understood that led nowhere. Now there's no need. Because once you've processed something fully, you don't revisit it. You outgrow it. You started to recognize the cycle for what it was. Every time emotions took the lead, progress slowed, clarity blurred, and nothing truly moved forward. So without needing to declare it, You adjusted. Now when something arises, you don't default to reaction, you default to direction. Instead of defending or venting, you pause just long enough to ask what actually solves this. That single shift changed everything. Because while others are still caught in how they feel about the situation, you're already focused on what moves it forward. And that alone separates you in a way they can't easily replicate. People around you still reach for the version of you that used to respond on cue. The one who would engage, justify, or show visible reaction. And when that version doesn't appear, something in them starts to unravel. The rhythm they relied on is gone. So they push harder, speak longer, increase intensity, trying to recreate a response they understand. But it never arrives. You don't meet them in that space anymore. And that absence isn't empty. It's deliberate. It leaves them navigating a dynamic that no longer includes the reactions they once depended on. And that unfamiliar silence is what unsettles them most. You're already moving toward resolution while they're still sitting inside the reaction. It's not that you've shut emotions down. They just don't linger anymore. Suppression leaves traces, cracks that show up later. What you've built is different. It's a system where emotions pass through, deliver their message, and don't overstay. That's why everything about you feels more precise now. Your words aren't crowded, your choices don't waver, and your presence carries a weight that doesn't need to announce itself. Because while others are still trying to understand what they feel, you've already translated it into action. You're no longer performing for validation or trying to win an argument. You're simply addressing what's real and moving it forward. There's no need to prove, convince, or outshine. You just handle what's in front of you with clarity and intention. And when that realization finally reaches them, it lands with weight. Because they understand something has shifted at a deeper level. You're no longer engaging in the same emotional exchanges that once defined the interaction. And without that familiar ground, the entire dynamic rewrites itself around your quiet, decisive way of operating. Number 2, you approach disruption as something to work with, not something to take personally. Where others see offense, you see input, information that can be shaped, redirected, and used. While they internalize it as an attack, you externalize it as a situation. That difference changes everything. There's no rush to defend, no need to justify, no spiral into frustration. Instead, you assess, break it down, and look for leverage. Because to you, a crisis isn't a statement about you. It's a problem waiting to be understood and turned into something useful, while others are still trying to make sense of why it feels so personal. You outgrew that reflex. At some point, it became clear that reacting personally strips a situation of its value. So you stopped absorbing it and started studying it. When something goes wrong, you don't rush to defend your identity or protect your image. You step back just enough to see what it's revealing. Patterns, weak points, timing, details others miss because they're too busy reacting. And in that space, your focus shifts from why is this happening to me to what is this showing me? That's where your advantage comes from. Because while others are protecting their ego, you're extracting insight and already adjusting your next move. Your focus moves immediately to evaluation. What broke down? Where did it start? What does this reveal about the system behind it? You approach it like a technician diagnosing a fault, methodical, detached, and precise. There's no urgency to take it personally, only a need to understand it accurately. And that shift creates distance between you and the chaos. While others are still reacting to how it feels, you're already mapping out how it works. That's the advantage. They're stuck in the moment. But you are already extracting the lesson and positioning yourself for what comes next. This way of thinking wasn't something you picked up in easy moments. It was built through repetition, through facing challenges without a safety net. You had to learn quickly that reacting emotionally didn't solve anything. It only blurred what needed to be seen. Over time, that pattern became obvious. So you made a shift, not out of preference, but out of necessity. You stopped personalizing every setback and started extracting value from it. Instead of asking why it targeted you, you focused on what it revealed. And that single adjustment changed everything. Because while others were still overwhelmed by the situation, you were already turning it into something you could use. Pressure no longer registers as something meant to weigh you down. It shows up as data to work with. Where others tense up, you become more focused. It doesn't overwhelm you, it organizes your thinking. You start separating what matters from what doesn't, filtering out the noise until only the useful pieces remain. And in that process, what looks like disorder to everyone else starts revealing its pattern to you. You don't get lost in the chaos, you decode it. Because to you, it's not random. It's a system exposing itself, waiting to be understood and used. And that contrast becomes visible in the way you move through setbacks, quickly, cleanly, without dragging chaos behind you. From the outside, it feels almost unnatural. People anticipate a reaction, some visible sign of disruption, but instead, they're met with composure. While they're still caught in the story of what went wrong, you've already shifted into what comes next. There's no need to broadcast it, no need to process it out loud. You adjust, recalibrate, and continue. And that quiet transition, from disruption to direction, is what leaves them unsettled, because it doesn't follow the script they're used to. That contrast leaves a space they don't know how to bridge. It highlights the difference in real time, and that can feel exposing to those who were expecting you to struggle the same way. It's not that pressure skips you. You feel it, you recognize it, but it no longer dictates your direction. You don't dismiss the challenge, you just refuse to hand it authority over your mindset. Where others let it take over their thinking, you keep it contained, observed, and in perspective. And that restraint is what creates the gap. There inside the pressure, while you're already working through it. Every challenge becomes something you shape, not something that defines you. Instead of seeing setbacks as evidence of limitation, you treat them as raw input, something to refine your thinking, your approach, your next move. And when others start to notice that nothing seems to break your momentum, it forces a realization. The same situations that stall them are strengthening you. That's when the shift becomes undeniable. You're no longer just getting through what happens, you're extracting value from it, turning every obstacle into something that actively works in your favor. Number 3, you moved beyond waiting for balance and started creating direction. While most people fixate on whether things are fair, equal, or justified, you recognized that reality doesn't always operate on those terms. Measuring everything against fairness kept people stuck, waiting, debating, hoping for alignment that may never come. You shifted focus. Instead of asking if it's fair, you ask what can be shaped, influenced, or redirected. That change puts you in motion while others remain in evaluation. Because while they're still deciding how things should be, you're already working with how things are and turning that into an outcome. It may feel principled on the surface, but in practice, it holds people in place. Waiting for things to be fair means waiting for conditions you don't control. And that waiting keeps you reacting instead of moving. You stepped out of that cycle. At some point, it became clear that fairness doesn't build outcomes. It delays them. So you stopped relying on it as a reference point. You stopped measuring progress against something external and unpredictable. Instead, you focused on what can actually be influenced. And that shift removed the hesitation, because you no longer needed the situation to be fair. You just needed it to be workable. What holds value now is the outcome, not the expectations surrounding it. You're no longer waiting for alignment, approval, or ideal conditions. You're working with what's available. You break situations down to their components, identify what can be influenced, and apply pressure where it actually creates movement. It's not about forcing control. It's about understanding where control already exists and using it with precision. While others are hoping things shift in their favor, You are already adjusting the variables in front of you, quietly shaping the direction instead of waiting for it to change. That's how you convert dead ends into direction. While others are still debating fault and searching for validation, you've already moved past that layer and started restructuring what's possible. You're not anchored to being right. You're focused on what works. And that difference creates a gap they can't navigate. Because when fairness is their only framework, anything outside of it feels chaotic. But for you, it's clarity. You're not reacting to the situation. You're redesigning it. And by the time they realize what's happening, the outcome has already shifted in your favor.